Now we're going to move on to personality disorders. And there are 10 personality disorders. We're going to go through each of these in detail, but this is just to give you a real quick recap of what we're about to cover. The thing with these personality disorders is that they are consistent behavior patterns. It's not just like, oh, one time you didn't trust this guy because you didn't know him. It's persistent and consistent across the board. And it is making it so that your social interactions and interpersonal relationships don't flourish. So this isn't like, oh, one time a person steals a tube of lipstick from CVS, they must be histrionic personality disorder or something. This is something that's over a long period of time and it's unchangeable. So with personality disorders, it's not like, oh, you can cure it. It's more so you can treat it. First, we have paranoid personality disorder. This isn't full-on break from reality or psychosis like you see with schizophrenia, but it's still a constant worry or a constant feeling of people being against you, which can kind of get in the way of your interpersonal relationships, particularly when we talk about antisocial personality disorder. This deals with sociopaths and psychopaths. They lack the ability to feel other people's emotions. They lack the ability to feel empathy. They lack the ability to really inherently know the difference between right and wrong. They know this is good for me or this is bad for me, or this feels good or it doesn't feel good. They don't think about this is bad for someone else, or this might hurt somebody else. Now, just because someone has antisocial personality disorder does not mean that they're going to be a violent psychopath or that they're going to commit violent crimes. We do have a higher rate of sociopaths and psychopaths in jail, but we also have a very high rate of sociopaths in just day-to-day society, often filling roles as CEOs or other prominent businessmen. They have a lot of charisma. They don't have a lot of moral quandaries when it comes to, doing whatever it takes to get ahead. And so some of that behavior is actually beneficial to them economically. So just because someone has antisocial personality disorder doesn't necessarily mean, oh, they're going to murder me and eat my brain, right? That's more so in like the psychopath level of violent criminals who feel a need or an urge to complete those sorts of actions. So if you're interested in watching like Silence of the Lamb for your project, that's where this would fall in with the antisocial personality disorder. The histrionic personality disorder is kind of gender biased. I always put histrionic and narcissistic personality disorders together, but typically women tend to be diagnosed with histrionic personality disorder and men tend to be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. With histrionic personality disorder, a person tends to be very dramatic, very excessively emotional. They want to be the center of attention all the time, and they may be sexually provocative or inappropriate. Narcissistic personality disorder is, I am God, you should treat me like I'm God. I'm more important and special than everybody else. Borderline personality disorder, people often confuse with bipolar disorder. Borderline personality disorder is when you go through those rapid cycles. You could be like very, very affectionate 1 hour, and then the next hour you're very distant and cold, or you can be very happy and active, and then the next you're angry and like yelling. That's where we get the borderline personality disorder. Schizoid personality disorder is when you have an extreme lack in interpersonal relationships. You don't want to communicate with anybody. You don't want to have a partner. You just want to be by yourself and people leave you alone. The kind of like, get off my lawn sort of mentality. The schizotypal is the less severe version of that. That's where you're socially isolated, but also like a little bit eccentric. So think like a hermit in the woods or like a wizard or something where they just feel like a little bit off and they don't actively seek out other people, but it's not necessarily like I can't have any contact with anyone ever. Avoidant personality disorder, it's going to relate to having a lot of feelings of shame and anxiety and inadequacy. So very, very low self-esteem. So they'll try to avoid relationships or avoid interactions with others because of that. Dependent personality disorder is when we get codependent relationships. The dependent personality disorders and the antisocial personality disorders kind of like draw themselves together. Also like narcissistic personality disorder. Because a dependent personality disorder sees themselves as childlike and they see others as powerful. While someone with narcissistic personality disorder would agree. They would say, yes, I am powerful and you are a child, I should be in charge. So you have the dominant and subservient relationships between the two. So some of these personality traits or disorders actually magnetize towards each other and result in codependent relationships. Then the obsessive compulsive personality disorder. This is different from the anxiety disorder. Remember, with OCD, you have a fear of something happening, like a fear of germs, and so you obsessively wash your hands or do something a certain number of times. With obsessive personality disorder, this is where you have to have everything a certain way. That's where you see like the orderly, like the desk, everything's in the right place, or the hangers are exactly 1 inch apart. They conform rigidly to rules. There is no shades of gray. It's just clear black and white. It either is or it isn't. That sort of mentality. So with paranoid personality disorder, it's exactly what it sounds like. You think people are out to get you. Not that you're having hallucinations about it, but more so that you just think that people are inherently trying to take advantage of you. Now, this is more commonly seen in men than in women. And remember, this has to be something that is consistent, really seeing that kind of threat everywhere. The next personality disorder with histrionic personality disorder, I just kind of think Michael Scott. Y'all know Michael Scott from The Office? He wants all the attention. He behaves inappropriately, makes all the that's what she said jokes, like he makes like the sexual innuendo jokes all the time, and he has extreme emotion. So this is what I think of when I think the histrionic personality disorder. So even though this is overdiagnosed in women, clearly we see some examples of people from the male gender showing these same behaviors. As opposed to narcissistic personality disorder, which is I think that I'm more important than everybody else, and I should be treated as such. This is where you believe you're more important than you are, to the point that you think everybody should treat you in that way. Now, what's interesting about this is the etiology of how is it that a person develops narcissistic personality disorder? Well, in childhood, it could be a result of being given too much attention. So like helicopter parents, your parents are telling you that you're the best thing ever and that everyone should treat you like you are, versus your parents not paying attention to you. So it's two ends of the spectrum, either paying too much attention to your child and not letting them develop any skills for themselves and expect everything to be handed to them, like a little bit bratty, versus completely ignoring them and giving them the cold shoulder so that they turn and look for that kind of boost to their self-esteem of, I need people to pay attention to me and to treat me like I'm special. So the next thing that was on our list was borderline personality disorder. Now, this is the one that people always confuse with bipolar. Just yesterday, somebody told me, oh, so-and-so is so bipolar. 1 minute they're happy and excited, and then the next moment they're screaming your head off or biting your head off, all this stuff. And I'm like, actually, that's borderline personality disorder, not bipolar. Y'all may remember that with bipolar disorder, it's where you have manic phases or manic episodes for extended periods of time, not just like, 1 hour you're in a manic phase and then the next hour you're in a depressive phase, but more so lasting for weeks or even months. Borderline personality is when you rapidly cycle through those emotions. So with this, you have instability in your relationships. It's profound instability in your affect, meaning your emotions, instability in your self-schema or your sense of self, and instability in your relationships. Particularly, people with BPD cycle back between devaluation and idealization, meaning that in the idealistic phase, they put people up on a pedestal and they think that they're awesome and they're all lovey-dovey, love bombing and all of that. Then they move to the devaluation stage of the relationship where they start treating that significant other like they're not important. Okay, so moving back and forth. So if you're in a relationship with someone with untreated borderline personality disorder, then you may have that Jekyll and Hyde sort of relationship where 1 minute things are great and then the next minute things are tense and you're walking on eggshells. People with BPD also tend to have poor self-esteem, which leads to a high propensity for self-harming behavior. So like behaviors like cutting behaviors or drug and alcohol abuse. And they can make some pretty complicated decisions when it comes to impulses. So you have a higher rate of self-harm, a higher rate of self-mutilation, higher rates of childhood abuse. Basically, you get this idea of thinking that is split. It's split between black and white. So in the image that y'all see on the PDF, here you see that splitting. You see that change in their personality. At the top, she's talking with a child and showing her two different shoes and then hugging her and is all affectionate. That's the idealization. Then in the next, she's getting angry, yelling at her phone, and then throws a flower pot, just yeets it across the room. So you have unstable, emotional, volatile states, unstable relationships, and poor impulse control. That stems towards devaluation of yourself, but also devaluation of others as you go back and forth between those relationships. So this is the one that people most often get confused with bipolar disorder. So it's important to note that with borderline personality disorder, the emotions are very unstable and volatile. With bipolar disorder, you have extended periods of time when someone's in a manic episode or in a depressive episode. The other personality disorder that we're going to cover is antisocial personality disorder. Now, a lot of people get this confused by saying that, antisocial means like you're an introvert or you're shy. That is not at all what antisocial personality disorder means. This disorder is when you lack the ability to feel empathy or sympathy for others. What's the difference between sympathy and empathy? Yes, Terrence. Exactly right. Sympathy is when you know that something bad has happened to that person, so you're sorry that it happened, but you may not know what that experience is like. Like if you have a friend whose parents are going through a divorce and your parents haven't gone through a divorce, then you can be like, I can sympathize with you, but I don't know what it's like. If you empathize, then that means you've gone through that experience or you're familiar with that experience, and so you're able to understand it on a deeper level. With antisocial personality, sociopaths and psychopaths, they lack that ability. They have a lack of conscience. They can do wrong because they don't feel any feelings of shame or guilt or empathy towards others that they may have wronged. And so they don't understand that basic fundamental of human emotions of shame and guilt to monitor their behavior. So now their behavior is based entirely on what they want and if they can get it. So sometimes this behavior can be adaptive. We do see a high percentage of CEOs falling on the antisocial spectrum of sociopathy. Remember, just because someone has antisocial personality disorder does not mean that they're a criminal or that they're going to hurt people on purpose or that they're going to be violent or eat people like Jeffrey Dahmer. It simply means that they lack the ability to feel the same emotions of empathy and guilt. So they can learn those emotions. They can learn how to blend in and how to function in society like others, but they still lack the genuine experience of those emotions. So not everyone who is a sociopath is going to try to kill you or try to assault you or something. So many famous billionaires are sociopaths because they have what it takes to make the decisions that make them money, even if it costs other people stress or unfortunate events. They also fail to conform to social norms and to laws, so they fail to conform to society as a whole, hence the term anti-social. It doesn't have to do with their personality being friendly or outgoing. It has to do with whether or not they can function within society, or do they end up breaking society's rules. So with that lack of remorse and guilt, they can become very deceitful or irresponsible. They can be aggressive or fearless and tend to exploit others. So we do see a higher percentage of sociopaths in the criminal population as well, but not all sociopaths are criminal. Now, the differentiation between sociopath and psychopath is that psychopaths are a small subset of sociopaths. Most sociopaths are not violent individuals. They're more like white-collar crime, fraud, things like that, dealing with money, because they can benefit from it. Think about the cost-risk analysis. If you murder somebody, there's big risk in that. You could go to jail. You don't get a lot out of it. But if you steal people's pensions, less likely that you're going to go away for life. So most sociopaths are going to deal in those non-violent crimes. There's a small subset of them known as psychopaths. So murderers like Charles Manson, he tried to instigate a race war known as Helter Skelter, where he had a family murdered by his cult followers. I think he died in prison recently. He also got married in prison, which is there are just some people that just write to serial killers and they're like, hey, how you spell your number? to slide into the DMs of a sociopath. And other famous serial killers like Ted Bundy, although Ted Bundy probably had more of a narcissistic personality disorder coupled with an antisocial personality disorder. John Wayne Gacy, all of these different things where they basically have expressed, when people have studied their brains and studied, why they did what they did, they've expressed that they lack the ability to feel what others feel. And so that allows them to engage in antisocial behavior. Now, this personality disorder is going to be more common in men than in women. I think it's less than 1% of the population are female sociopaths, so it's much more commonly found in the male gender. As to why sociopaths and psychopaths lack the ability to feel empathy, it's tied to lower levels of gray matter. Y'all may remember that gray matter does a lot of the functioning in your brain when it comes to processing with your neurons. So we see this biological link. Here we see PET scans showing the activity in the brain that shows that in a murderer's frontal cortex, they have less activity. What does your frontal lobe do in your brain? Yeah, it helps with thinking. It helps with making decisions. It helps with judgments. And so if you have decreased activity in your frontal lobe, then that's going to mean that you're going to be more impulsive, that you're not going to restrain yourself as often. So we do see that kind of problematic behavior. Now, there is no cure for antisocial personality disorder. There's no way to implant them with a new limbic system that can make them process emotions like empathy and sympathy and regret and shame and guilt. However, this does not mean that we cannot work with a prognosis or work with different therapies in order to decrease the harm that could come from this disorder. So with therapy, a person with sociopathy can learn how to blend in. They can learn how to be effective mimics, so that they don't ostracize themselves from others, or they can learn the difference between right and wrong logically, even if they can't feel it intuitively. And so these therapies can help with promoting that sort of behavior, even if the thought process isn't genuine. So a lot of people with sociopathy can be very charming and charismatic. They can get people to follow them. They can become like cult leaders. And it's because they're able to mimic other people's feelings without having to suffer the actual feelings themselves. So cognitive therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy, this is dealing with listening to people's thoughts and how they think and why they think the way that they do. So explaining to someone with sociopathy how their behavior affects other people, and not necessarily saying, oh, well, it's not because you don't want to hurt other people, but more so saying, look at how this could negatively affect you. If you cause harm to somebody else, like you steal from them, then you could get caught. You could go to jail. So maybe you should change your behavior to not steal things because of the consequences. So it's more black and white rather than moral. The humanistic therapy, the ideal of ideal self versus real self, that might not be as effective because of the lack of those fundamental emotions. And then psychoanalytic therapy with free association, just basically talking about what's in your head to put it into words and then able to raise your unconscious and subconscious to the conscious level. In terms of medication that can be used to treat personality disorders, anti-anxiety drugs can be very helpful with borderline personality disorder because of the issues with low self-esteem and ineffective judgment making and decision making. It can slow the brain down, so it can help with those kind of manic behaviors that result in borderline personality disorder. So Xanax, Ativan, Valium, all of those types of benzos act as depressants on the sympathetic nervous system. With avoidant personality disorder, which anxiety is a big part of avoidant personality disorder, this is going to be particularly helpful. But again, treatment always varies. There's no one set treatment for anything in the DSM. It's very open-ended because it's not one size fits all. Now, the issue with the biomedical approach is that you have a high risk of addiction, both physical addiction and psychological addiction. Using these benzos as a coping mechanisms to shut down your emotions, or if you're prescribed antidepressants like SSRIs, if you try to go off of those SSRIs, you can go through a period of withdrawal. Now, serotonin withdrawal is not fun. You basically feel like a wet paper towel. You can't feel anything other than just a heaviness. You don't want to move. You feel nauseous. You get headaches. So it's just like if you're going through a withdrawal for a drug, but your brain is reacting to the lack of that serotonin inhibitor. And so that's going to lead to some negative side effects. So it's always important not to quit your medication cold turkey. Be consistent with the medication. And if you feel like you want to change the medication, then you need to make sure that it's done under a doctor's care, because suicidal ideation can also increase with drastic changes in this biomedical model. So if you're on a medication like a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and then you stop taking it suddenly, that can mess up your mood even more. So looking at the percentage of Americans who have ever experienced psychological disorders, this breaks it down by ethnicity as well as by gender. For the most part, you're going to see women having a higher rate of experience with psychological disorders, with the exception of addiction. Addiction are going to have a much higher percentage in the male gender for addiction. Then with ethnicity, you're going to see that even though the white population makes up the majority of at least the United States population, you see that people of color suffer a lot of symptoms and experiences with mental illness. This could be a sociocultural model. If you look at things like alcohol abuse, dependence, or anxiety, phobias, all of that could relate to having to deal with the stressors of racism or socioeconomic inequality. So that could play a role in the social cultural model of things like depression and anxiety. So is there anything interesting that you note on this chart as it relates to the differences in gender and ethnicity? One thing that I found interesting was looking at the antisocial personality disorder, the difference between men and women. 4.5% of the male population has been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, compared with 0.8% of women that have been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. It'd be interesting to see also the levels of diagnoses with narcissistic personality disorder versus histrionic personality disorder, since women tend to be diagnosed more with the histrionic personality disorder and men tend to be diagnosed more with narcissists. Schizoid personality disorder. This is when somebody exhibits eccentric or odd behaviors. They can be emotionless or disengaged. My favorite example of this is Gollum from Lord of the Rings. Y'all know the guy that goes like, "My precious." He's very eccentric. He lives in a cave and he eats fish raw. So he's going to fall under this category of schizoid, okay? Odd behaviors, eccentric behaviors, disengaging from others, although he does have some extreme emotions when he talks to himself in the movie with the different personalities that he has. Within the Schoology page, I have this activity for y'all to complete if you want to rate yourself on the major traits of narcissism. It's like a little quiz, like the personality quiz that you took for Wellness Wednesday. Remember that the main characteristics of someone with a narcissistic personality disorder is a lack of empathy, an inflated self-image, inflated self-worth, a deep need for attention and adoration and affection, and an inability to handle criticism. So this is a little bit different from sociopaths. Like with antisocial personality disorder, the narcissists do show a decreased ability to feel empathy for others, but they also are more attention seeking with that. So they want to be the center of attention. They want to be the most important person in the room, and you can't criticize them or else they will fly off the handle. So some extreme emotions there. Avoidant personality disorder is exactly what it sounds like. They avoid contact with other people. Now, it's not because they want to be alone. It's not because they hate other people or they don't want to have relationships with other people. They want to interact with others, but they don't because they fear looking foolish or they fear being rejected. So it's this fear of rejection. It's these feelings of inadequacy that leads to their behavior of closing themselves off from others. So anxiety is a major symptom of this particular personality disorder.